When FaZe sent off the newly repaired and modified Kirby, his expression was mixed. The modification Charlotte suggested changed the Kirby in a way that hopefully would come as an unwelcome surprise to Alexander Steele. Michael Dumont must be thinking the same thing. The low-key fourth-ranked mech designer from the qualifications hadn't raised eyebrows like Patricia or Edwin, but he possessed real capabilities to make it this far. The skirmisher's smooth and practically undamaged form was a testament to his repair skills. The Kirby's heavy, burdened form stepped forward into the arena yet again. Its steps echoed the quiet arena as it beheld its opponent. The medium mech looked as spotless as ever, though it exchanged its twin submachine guns for double kite shields. Damn, this is ridiculous. FaZe muttered to himself as his eyes widened at the ridiculous loadout. It wasn't unheard of for mechs to bring double shields to the battlefield. 2 shields offered a great amount of protection against ranged damage. Knight-type mechs holding a defensive position often made for great defenders for their more vulnerable comrades if they carried 2 shields for maximum cover. Some savvy manufacturers even got in on the action by selling purpose-built tower shields that weighed like a brick but could withstand incredible punishment. That was why the notion that Alexander carried a pair of heavy shields for his swift and agile mech sounded ridiculous. Why give up his advantage in mobility to gain an average amount of durability? The shields may prove useful against the Kirby's guns, but their weight turned the skirmisher into a sitting duck, allowing Charlotte to pound Alexander into a pulp before he'd even reach his enemy. Could it be that Alexander is carrying another weapon? The timer counted down. Plenty of people in the audience took note of this match. Not only did it determine which team entered the finals, it also signified a battle between 2 unusually modified mechs. The crowd was beginning to come around to the idea behind the Fusion Cup. It not only tested a pilot's judgment and skill, it also involved his partner's craftiness. The mech designer's role might not be as flashy as the pilot's, but his every move affected the battlefield in a way that was no less influential. FaZe feared Michael quite a bit for this reason. The man hid his competence well, for the skirmisher that he fixed up revealed no hints of what lurked beneath its spotless facade. 3, 2, 1, start. The match exploded into action as Charlotte fired all her guns without waiting to engage her targeting systems. Her manual aim proved sufficient as pretty much both of its explosive shells detonated squarely against the skirmisher's shields. Surprisingly, the shield held against the immense assaults. The lasers fired from the Kirby's shoulders merely splashed the shield's surface with ineffectual heat. The second volley of shells from the Kirby's arm cannons failed to deal any substantial damage to the sturdy shields. The skirmisher calmly stepped forward, leaning its posture square against the shields just before Charlotte fired. While the shields contributed much to the skirmisher's unyielding pace, Alexander's impeccable piloting skill made sure his mech maintained its balance. How can this? I don't even. FaZe tried to parse the sight in front of him. The shields were able to withstand incredible punishment far beyond the materials provided by the organizer should be able to withstand. Are they cheating? In front of a crowd of millions? Likely not. Such blatant rule-breaking threw away all credibility for the young Tigers exhibition. Then considering all the state-of-the-art machinery the mech designers had at their disposal, then Michael must have treated an existing pair of shields with a highly advanced composition so far ahead that it must involve some secrets from a second-rate state. He grimaced at the guess. The organizers were probably overjoyed when they get to peek over Michael's shoulders. The technique he used might not be known to the higher-ups at the Bright Republic. Perhaps the Bright Republic introduced the Fusion Cup for reasons other than allowing mech designers to gain some fame alongside pilots. This implied the Republic was desperate to steal new technologies, which was ridiculous. Though it only ranked as a minor star country, it still possessed unimaginable wealth compared to most corporations. The income they made off Bentheim and the budding mech industry there ensured they possessed the resources to enhance their tech base. There must be something else behind the Fusion Cup. Something I can't see yet. In any case, nothing FaZe figured out could change the situation in the arena. The shielded skirmisher came quite close and only failed to reach the Kirby due to the kinetic force of the explosions pushed it back. Harg. What does it take to crack open your shell? Charlotte shouted in frustration as she slowly stepped her mech backwards while continuing to fire her cannons. She kept her laser mount silent. The lasers inflicted negligible damage to the shields. It hurt her more than the enemy if she kept shooting to the point of overheating. When the skirmisher finally came close enough to engage in melee, Alexander patiently waited for another pair of shells to impact his dented but still intact shield. The moment the cannons fired off their payload and loaded another round, the shields dropped and a twin pair of heated knives entered the mech's hands. So that's what you were hiding? Charlotte yelled as she finally re-engaged her lasers. At this range, a barrage of shots created a couple of awful burn holes in her opponent's armor. Yet the lasers lacked the punching power to stop or hinder the skirmisher in any way. Mechs often use rapid-fire lasers to deal a great amount of constant damage in an efficient way, but such a narrow focus made them vulnerable to sudden strikes like the one Alexander performed. The skirmisher jumped in the air and landed both ends of its knives into the Kirby's shoulder mounts, instantly piercing them and rendering the laser scrap. Too impatient to wait for her next shells to reload, Charlotte simply based her cannon tubes against the hanging skirmisher, successfully lodging it off her mech's frame. Unfortunately, the shock dealt some damage to the internal modules of the cannons, causing their reloading process to stop. Instead, Charlotte engaged her surprise. "See you, sucker." One of the 3 boxy rocket launchers started to flare as the boosters hidden within came to life. This was what Charlotte requested Phase to incorporate. In her opinion, 3 rocket launchers mounted to her back was a little excessive. She'd rather replace one of them with some boosters angled in such a way that it could help her turn her mech around rapidly. Most heavy mechs turned like whales on land. Charlotte loved her new rocket launchers, but she was aware her opponents wouldn't obediently stand behind her and let the rockets launch at them with a smile. So she conceived of the creative idea of hollowing out one of the launchers and stuff some acceleration boosters in its place. As a pilot, she lacked the background to appreciate the challenges involved in such an operation, especially since they were short on time. Nevertheless, his budding jury-rigging skill worked full tilt in order to produce a solution that turned the impossible into something that might work. The operation had to finish swiftly in order to make it in time for this match. In record time, Vase managed to hollow out the launcher, crudely using an advanced cutting and scraping tool to crudely scrape away the internal space. Then, he went to the pile of parts and dug up a pile of small, emergency boosters. Mech designers often mounted these one-use booster units on light or medium mechs to provide a one-time emergency boost or to launch a module outwards. Such boosters weren't designed to support a heavy mech's entire bulk. But if the Kirby borrowed the additional force produced by the boosters to turn faster, then they possessed just enough power to make the trouble worthwhile. Alexander responded quickly at the sudden turn of events. Before the Kirby could turn around and present its rockets at him, he used his superior speed to keep up with the rotation. The response came a little late. Charlotte already fired her middle launcher as soon as she caught him in her firing arc. Most of the rockets that launched failed to hit anything and miserably flew away to explode on the ground or against a security screen. A couple of rockets managed to catch the skirmisher in glancing blows. Their proximity detonations crumpled and damaged the mech's right arm, causing the poorly armed mech to drop a knife. The explosions also caused the skirmisher to lose its balance, an almost fatal consequence for a mech that relied on speed. "Take another round," Charlotte yelled with vicious glee as she activated her second and final rocket pod. The rockets flew out uncontrollably in multiple directions, a sign of poor and shoddy installation. Nevertheless, the inherent spread of the rockets helped Charlotte cast her net wider, causing the skirmisher to get hit near its waist, buckling a few armor plates and disturbing the engines that rested nearby. Right now, both mechs were at an impasse. Charlotte emptied her rockets and lost her lasers. She re-engaged her cannon arms and prayed her mech could reload them as fast as possible. Alexander on the other hand lost an arm and got some damage onto its armor. While he hadn't suffered a fatal hit, his mech was dangerously off balance and out of position to attempt another attack. He had to get close. It took a bit of time, but Alexander's mech passed by Charlotte's still loading weapon tubes. With a lunging stab, he struck the Kirby's head, successfully damaging and disabling its main sensors. The sudden strike caused Charlotte to flinch, but she retained enough sense to kick out with one of the Kirby's heavy leg. The medium mech's legs took a glancing blow, crunching aside armor and damaging a couple of sensitive knee components. Alexander tried to command his mech to pull out its knife and stab the Kirby again, but his mech lost its balance for just a tiny moment due to the damage. After switching over to the Kirby's chest-mounted backup sensors, Charlotte aimed again with her freshly reloaded cannon arms. She shot her left cannon as soon as the barrel tracked her opponent. The weapon fired just as the skirmisher's knife sliced into one of the Kirby's armor gaps. Shit. The explosive shell failed to detonate due to impacting within its minimum safety range. If the shell detonated its explosive payload at full strength, both the target and the Kirby would get hit by the blast radius. The Kirby's ammunition was significantly tuned down for this tournament, so the Kirby might have stayed safe, but the safety range remained unimpacted, which led to Charlotte's curse as she realized her mistake. The knife impacted the gap near the Kirby's left arm joint, which disabled the arm cannon. But before Alexander could pull out the weapon and retreat, Charlotte went berserk and knocked the Kirby's upper torso forward, causing it to fall in Alexander's direction. Still recovering from its previous attack, the skirmisher failed to disengage in time, causing it to get caught into the Kirby's falling momentum. No one spoke. Even FaZe stood with his mouth wide open. Everyone just watched as the skirmisher comically tried to wriggle its remaining limbs underneath the Kirby's prodigious weight. It was like watching a tiny mouse scurry from underneath the paw of a cat. Nothing worked. Charlotte could just keep rocking the Kirby's weight against her opponent to crush it into a pancake. The winners are Charlotte Hoffmeister and FaZe Lerkinson. Their team has successfully advanced into the finals. An alarm went up as the referees activated several safeties. Thick robotic arms emerged from underneath the arena floor and lifted up the Kirby with difficulty. The people in charge obviously feared the Kirby might actually crush the thin medium mech's cockpit with its bulk. FaZe couldn't blame them. The skirmisher looked as if it sacrificed even the armor around the cockpit to get it to move so fast. As the pilots exited their cockpits, they all met at the center of the arena to shake each other's hands. "Congratulations on your win," Alexander haplessly said as he shook Charlotte's hand. "You caught me good with that fall. It would be reckless suicide to pull off such a stunt in a real battlefield, but in a duel situation I guess it worked out very well for you." Charlotte huffed at the excuse. "If it were up to me, those shells would have shredded your mech. Those safeties are bullshit. My Kirby can take the punishment." While the two pilots kept exchanging excuses, FaZe and Michael Dumont met each other a short distance away. "Great engineering. I don't know how you made those shields so durable in such a short time." Michael gave out a sullen smile. "It's just a trick. It can't compare to reaching the final round when you're ranked near the end." FaZe didn't like the mech designer's tone. He maintained his composure though. "I admit I'm lucky enough to be paired with a good pilot with an uncommon mech. Her heavy mech poses a lot of problems just by carrying so much stuff around. I know it put you in a tough position." The modesty only soured Michael's expression even further. "If this year's mech design competition hadn't switched to this bullshit Fusion Cup, then you'd be congratulating me. You're right in that you got lucky, punk. Your team beat mine fair and square, but if it came down to a showdown between just you and me, then I'd wipe the floor with you 99 times out of 100. If FaZe wasn't aware that quite a number of recorders were pointed in his direction, then he'd give the prick a piece of his mind. Instead, he kept up his smile and straight up turned his back at Michael, signaling that the conversation was over as far as he was concerned. "You should gracefully resign now while you can." Michael gave his parting shot. "Don't think you can overcome Edwin McKinney. He gained the qualifications to study in the new Rubarth Empire for a reason. You can't imagine the depth of his knowledge." "Fair enough." The Kirby looked awfully wrecked, having lost both of its shoulder-mounted lasers while getting one of its arm cannons disabled as well. More troubling, the Kirby's abrupt fall at the end of the match left repercussions in the mech's internals. Mechs simply weren't built to fall like that with all their weight shifted into another direction. The organizers fortunately took their situation into account and gave FaZe a generous amount of time to fix up the Kirby as best he could. Shortly after they cleared the arena, the main tournament went back into swing. The quarterfinals and semifinals took quite a bit of time to complete. FaZe and Charlotte were scheduled to battle against Edwin and his partner's team just before the finals of the main event took place. "I don't know how strong Edwin will be, but even if it's inevitable that we lose, I'm not going down without a fight." When the Kirby entered the workshop, FaZe looked grim at the amount of damage it sustained. The fragile shoulder laser mounts were total losses while the knife wound that disabled one of the arm cannons was very hard to fix. In addition, the overheating damage from the first match still plagued the mech's internals in addition to the abrupt fall that certainly knocked a few things loose. All in all, the Kirby could be fixed in a week. As it was, FaZe only had an hour or two at most before the Kirby was scheduled to enter the stage for the last time tonight. He glanced at the arena, where the top favorite of the newly instated Fusion Cup trounced his opponent handedly. The top pilot of the Cup, Christopher Yang, happened to be the number 3 seed of the Young Tigers exhibition. Unfortunately for him, he got knocked out in the main tournament by getting matched against the predicted number 1 mech pilot. Thus, everyone inferred that the YTE offered somewhat of a second chance for him to win an actual prize. His medium mech sported thick armor and a vicious loadout hated by arena-goers everywhere. His wrist-mounted flamethrowers and stubby shotgun-like heat projector turned his mech into the penultimate close-range striker. The damage his weapon caused might not be as overpowering as solid projectiles, but they had the nasty property of cooking the enemy inside his cockpit. In optimal circumstances, the striker tanked everything its opponent threw at them and simply blasted them with constant heat, leading to an inevitable victory when the enemy's machine practically looked like it took a dive inside a volcano. Such a mech was terrifying already in an arena environment, but Vase cared more about Edwin McKinney. The prodigal son who returned from one of the biggest human superstates, Vase really dreaded what he cooked up. From what he saw so far, the striker moved more fluently than he'd expected of such a well-armored mech, and he spotted no gaps at all in its defenses. Christopher's current opponent managed to test his mech a little bit, but not to the point of actually threatening Christopher's lead due to the damage he sustained in the previous match. Charlotte grunted at Christopher's indomitable performance. Christopher's an arrogant son of a bitch, but he has the accomplishments to back it up. He rose up to become one of this year's top graduates due to his own hard work. He overcame poverty and lack of training resources to beat a lot of other mech pilots who were born with a silver spoon in their mouths. Vase could imagine how tough that was, being from the Lerkinson family as well. Pilots in well-off families and organizations enjoyed specialized diets, personal mech simulators in your home, and sometimes even private tutors instructing you from the ground up. The longer the match goes on, the more advantages Christopher accrues. We'll need to configure the Kirby in a way that will help end the match quickly. Tell it to me straight then. How's the arm? Can you fix the knife wound? After consulting a high-powered scanner, Vase grimaced at the results. The knife dug in too deep. That heated knife cut through several essential cables and feeds. I can't fix it without dismantling the entire arm. It's better to dislodge the arm from the shoulder socket and stick another arm in its place. Obviously, Charlotte disliked the idea very much. The Turbofire sported a very specific set of arm cannons. The spare parts provided by the organizers didn't include a weapon arm of the same model. She'd have to get used to a different weapon or switch over to a fully fingered humanoid arm. What about the shoulder launchers? I can replace them with generic launchers. They don't have to be lasers either. When Alexander wrecked your laser mounts, his knives only penetrated the casing and inner components. They stopped piercing through after that, leaving the modular sockets intact. If you don't care about fast and accurate targeting, I can whip up a new pair of shoulder mounts for you in a rush, but don't expect a good performance. Charlotte considered her options for a moment. Do the shoulder mounts first. If you can, mount rockets or something else that packs a heavy punch. As you said, my only chance to win is if I punch Christopher first. Nodding, Vase immediately went to work, selecting the same pair of rocket launcher mounts that he already mounted on the Kirby's shoulder. Due to the lack of time, he hadn't bothered replacing or refilling the back mount that turned into an improvised booster. This should still leave the Kirby with 5 rocket pods in total, which would wreck any mech at close range if fired upon successively. Vase worked hard in accomplishing the job in time. Even as the main tournament caused plenty of mechs to get wrecked while crowds of fans shouted the names of their favorite pilots, Vase fully concerned himself with bringing the Kirby back to a semblance of life. He poured as much of his emotions into the work as possible, hoping it could knock the presumptive champions off their thrones. What resulted from his hour-long frenzied tinkering was a heavy mech with 2 crude shoulder-mounted rocket launchers affixed to its shoulders. Unlike the streamlined laser mounts, the boxy, oversized rocket pods weighed the Kirby down significantly more. Together with the pods affixed to its back, the Kirby was dangerously top-heavy in its weight distribution. I can't do anything about the balance. Vase warned Charlotte as he moved on to working on replacing the arm. You'll have to move carefully and never let yourself get tipped over. Right. I'll keep that in mind. The work on the arm proceeded even faster and shoddier than Vase thought. He practically ripped the damaged cannon arm from the Kirby's shoulder socket, rendering it even more damaged, but Vase hardly cared at the moment. He inspected the socket and hastily removed whatever debris remained. Then, he picked up a generic heavy mech arm from the pile of parts and hastily installed it in the empty shoulder cavity. Even as the semi-finals of the main tournament started to wrap up, Vase hastily connected all the necessary cables without testing them to make sure they properly exchanged information and power to the empty arm. He skipped the fine-tuning and calibration of the arm entirely, which was a big taboo in his profession. An arm that wasn't tuned right felt like a crude prosthetic to a mech pilot. The responsiveness of the arm suffered greatly, but it couldn't be helped. The competition pushed Vase into cutting pretty much every corner he could find. The announcer already got ready to warm the crowd up as Vase asked Charlotte what weapon she wanted to wield for her new arm. And now, get ready for the final round of the Fusion Cup. Who will win the grand prize? Will it be the twin stars of the Bright Republic, the mighty Christopher Yang and the genius Edwin McKinney? Or will the underdog Charlotte Hoffmeister and Vase Lerkinson triumph once again with Lady Luck by their side? Granted, Vase could give the announcer a prize for adeptly making the final sound dead even. Whether the match resulted in a favorable outcome, nobody knew. Vase didn't dare analyze his chances. Instead, he quickly gave the Kirby a heavy tower shield and sent it off to Charlotte. Both pilots entered their cockpits and entered the arena. After they stood on their designated positions, the security screens came to life, protecting the audience from the violence that was about to ensue. Commence. Christopher Stryker sported the same loadout as the last match, which was an excellent decision on his team's part. Heavy mechs could be tough to peel apart, and a pilot as good as Charlotte wouldn't let an enemy come in close without paying for it, as she had proven in her first 2 matches. The first seconds of the match happened to everyone's expectations. Charlotte fired off her sole arm cannon while keeping her tower shield to the side for the moment. The cannon detonated squarely against Christopher's thick chest armor, but only managed to leave a lot of soot and a shallow crater behind. Charlotte waited for her cannon to reload and shot again at the same spot, managing to dig a little deeper. Oh, what's this? Christopher is nakedly provoking his opponent. He's not bothering to dodge at all. The naked arrogance in Christopher's heart came out in full display. The striker kept striding forward in a slow but constant pace. Each shell that exploded against its chest only managed to deal surface damage to the armor. The internals remained entirely unaffected. "I've got more in store for you," Charlotte frustratingly yelled as she launched the rockets from her shoulders. She actually fired them a bit further than optimal, but perhaps she figured it was better to make her move before Christopher changed his pattern. The inaccurate but powerful rockets flew straight ahead, most hitting nothing but empty air or the arena's security screen. What rockets did hit Christopher's mech spread out their damage, leaving the machine a bit disheveled but still fully intact. Vase gaped at the sight. It was one thing to treat a shield's armor, but to adjust the entire armor scheme of a mech in just half a day's time boggled the mind. This goes beyond the competence of a novice mech designer. Edwin's at least a journeyman in the standards of the Bright Republic. Perhaps he's even a master. This was the first time he truly felt he was a frog in a well. The galaxy possessed limitless wonder and countless treasures. Though it irked him to admit his current capabilities could not even touch Edwin's shadow, he was confident the mech designer system could pull him up to the standards of the bigger and wider galaxy in time. I wonder how the system is doing. It must be feeling a little cramped and lonely in my comm unit. Though Bentheim welcomed every visitor with a smile, Vase was under no illusion that much of his actions were monitored. Perhaps he might not warrant personal attention from an actual human, but he was sure there were dozens or hundreds of automated programs tracking him from cameras, microphones and countless other sensors. Only in the safety of his workshop where he meticulously controlled his own workspace did he truly feel safe in activating the system. Keeping my system locked in my comm unit is tempting fate. I should try and find a better solution to house the system once this ordeal is over. In any case, Christopher reached his optimal range. With one arm, he activated his flamethrower, and with the other he fired his stubby heat projector. Waves of visible and invisible heat combined with each other to crash against Charlotte's practically immobile frame. Much of the heat was absorbed by the shield, but due to its shoddy materials its forward-facing layers already started to melt. Christopher fired his weapons constantly from the same position, essentially battering the shield with heat. Charlotte kept up firing her sole cannon, only to slowly peel off the chest armor layer by layer at a snail's pace. It truly impressed the entire crowd how well Christopher's mech withstood the barrage. Seeing that her shells got dispersed without effort, Charlotte grunted in frustration and tried to charge forward. Unfortunately, the tower shield weighed down the Kirby too much, but even without the burden Christopher widened the distance with ease. It was perverse how Christopher's mech boasted armor almost as good as Charlotte's but with only a fraction of the weight. The match wound down as the Kirby suffered a slow death. Charlotte's ballistic cannon finally malfunctioned due to the internal damage it accrued by all the heat cooking the mech from the inside. It signaled the end of her chances of ever killing her opponent's mech. And we have a winner. The crowning champions of the Fusion Cup are Christopher Yang and Edwin McKinney. Congratulations to Lerkinson and Hoffmeister for putting up a valiant struggle. Please give it up for our hometown boy and girl. Perhaps admitting that this competition's balance was grossly out of whack, the audience clapped appreciatively at Vase and Charlotte's efforts to fight to the very end. Somehow, Vase felt most of his frustrations fade away. He got over the unfairness of competing against a prodigy who studied at an elite institution and using his advanced knowledge to his advantage. Second place is good enough, especially since I never intended to compete to the very top in the first place. From all the attention placed on him, Vase felt optimistic he could find a customer in the crowd. While Edwin proved his overwhelming dominance in the local mech scene, he was too unapproachable. Everyone could guess he was meant for greater things. As someone who never left the Republic in his entire lifetime, Vase put up a respectable fight, overcoming 2 opponents with luck and skill. Well, mostly skill. You didn't get to reach the finals if you lacked the qualifications to work as a proper mech designer. As the 2 teams met in the middle to shake each other's hands, the organizer set up an impromptu podium nearby. They waited for the announcer to finish his spiel so that they could accept their awards. So, can you give me a hint on how you made Christopher's mech so durable? The elite mech designer peered his eyes at Vase as if he was an unworthy bug. Okay, so you don't want to talk, Vase awkwardly remarked and discreetly pulled back. In contrast to his frosty conversation, his partner had an amiable conversation with Christopher. The young man wore a friendly smile as he explained the decisions he took in the battle, not that it required much effort on his part due to the overwhelming superiority of his mech. The announcer first awarded the 3rd place to the team that lost to FaZe and Charlotte in the 2nd round. Though Alexander and Michael's mech had been crushed by the Kirby's incredible weight, the operational capability of the mech remained intact, if a bit battered. Their opponents for the 3rd place had lost against Christopher's devastating heat armament, which meant pretty much the entire mech was half fried from the incredible heat. Repairing such damage when it spread out to the entire mech was a nightmare, and Vase didn't begrudge the mech designer for losing. Michael Dumont did a decent job fixing up Alexander's skirmisher to the point where it could wield a rifle. And now for the winners of the silver medallion. Please welcome our young talents Vase Lerkinson and Charlotte Hoffmeister. A much louder applause met the 2 young graduates as they ascended the podium and accepted the silver medallion from the floating cases in front of them. With smiles plastered to their faces, they both waved cheerfully at the crowd. Vase found it wasn't bad being appreciated for once. The celebration truly affected his mood for the better. In addition to receiving a commemorative medal to the first ever Fusion Cup held in the Republic, our 2 winners will also receive a cash prize of 200,000 credits each, along with preferable treatment akin to veteran status by the Bright Republic. The cash prize was a nice surprise, but it was a drop in the bucket considering the immense cost of business Vase had to deal with. It also clearly dwarfed the prize money of last year's mech design competition. What surprised him was that the Republic actually handed out preferable treatment to the 2 of them. Even Charlotte perked up significantly when she heard the words. Normally, only the champions of Young Tigers exhibition enjoyed preferable treatment. Damn, so I can strut around like a veteran now? She dreamingly asked. Veterans and other notables enjoyed many small benefits as payment for their many years of service. Every one of my classmates will have to give me the right of way. I can be among the first passengers to board a transit ship. I even get to pimp my mech if I enter the mech corps this year. Vase cared little for such social courtesies. What he cared about more was that preferable treatment entitled him to looser regulations and more favorable treatment by the government in matters such as applying for permits or the right to manufacture live ammunition. Though Vase wasn't about to run up to Cloudy Curtain's planetary government right now, he kept the details in mind for when he might need to expand his operations in the future. Naturally, Vase wasn't actually a veteran, having contributed nothing to the Republic's defense. While the special treatment might impress the Hicks, the more distinguished people in the audience were hardly impressed. Any little bit helps. Vase muttered to himself as he already scanned the audience for a potential customer. I don't believe no one's impressed by my work. His real struggle started now. With only half a month left before the bank demanded their 5 million credit interest payment, Vase had to find a market for his mech. The Mark Antony wasn't going to sell by itself. As the Fusion Cup came at an end, Vase and Charlotte stood at the side of the arena. Despite their exalted status as second-place winners, hardly anyone paid attention to the 2. The climax of the evening was about to start, as the 2 most talented new mech pilots ascended the main arena. The greatest show in the Bright Republic practically hammered in that the Fusion Cup was a side event in the end. No matter how impressive their winnings, they could expect to receive only 1% of the attention placed on the finalists of the main tournament. As Vase was never a mech pilot, he was indifferent to chasing personal fame. He'd rather build up the reputation of his business in a more sustainable way. I've got some business to do. Oh. Charlotte raised her eyebrow. Bailing out on me, are you? I was planning to bring you out to a sweet place that makes the best spare ribs in town. I'm kind of in a time crunch. I've started an independent mech design studio and I'm practically buried in debt as a result. I was kind of hoping to canvass the audience and find a market for my product. Oh. I see. I heard you nerdy types like to pursue a career at the big companies. It's pretty brave of you to start out on your own. We all have different dreams. Vase smiled ruefully. I know it's a tough road, but I don't regret stepping on it. I'm confident I can make it to the top someday. Wow. That's really impressive. Anyway, I won't distract you any further. Let's exchange contacts before you go. After they added each other to their contact lists, they separated. Charlotte headed over to her fellow pilots who congratulated her on her excellent showing. Vase on the other hand made his way past the families and other regular people and headed up to the spectating area reserved for the first-class ticket holders who wanted to enjoy the exhibition without screaming children nearby. Security let him in without a fuss, a perk for being a participant. Vase walked past an invisible screen that dampened most of the noise from the crowd down below. The dim lighting, luxurious upholstery, and the plentiful private viewing rooms gave the first-class area a sense of exclusivity. The people who possessed the qualifications to enter this area all emanated an air of class or martial might. Those present in the public areas all congregated into small groups of close-minded associates as they paid attention to the spectacle unfolding in the central arena. Vase took a deep breath and made sure the silver medallion he just won was visible on his chest. Then, with a pleasant smile, he approached the nearest group of people who looked like they wouldn't totally shut out others. A trio of what looked like industrialists and a couple of mid-ranking mech corps officers took their eyes away from the tense and slow-paced duel to focus their attention on Vase. "Ah, you're the second-place winner of that side contest, aren't you? Are you related to the Larkinsons?" Vase nodded politely at the officer. "My father's been on border patrol for many years, though recently he went missing." Everyone politely adopted a mourning expression, including Vase. "That's a shame. Those who guard our borders against the aliens are performing the highest duty for our nation. I'm still hopeful he'll live." Vase shrugged, but resumed smiling, not wanting to tread down on this topic any further. "In any case, I was hoping to interest you in a new mech variant I've recently developed for my startup business." One of the businessmen laughed politely. "As a matter of fact, I'm here to do the same thing. I'm a representative of Jackson and Partners. We were just discussing the Mech Corps potential renewal of their oldest 400-unit fleet of Scout Flyers." Well, that was awkward. They exchanged a little bit more before Vase was politely sent off like he was a toddler intruding upon adults doing serious business. He hadn't expected instant success, so his first rejection shouldn't affect him so much. Still, he felt he was being disregarded by the people around him. His youth and lack of track record weighed him down more significantly than he thought. "We only source our mechs from established suppliers. We signed fixed service contracts with our long-term partners so they can offer the best support for our mech needs. I have to admit, for a last-gen mech your Mark Antony variant belongs to the middle-upper tier. Nevertheless, my core only runs current-gen models. We like getting our hands on the newest toys available in the market, you see. Your Mark Antony is only good for a decade or two at most before it becomes obsolete. I collect only the classics and only in their most original form. I have nothing against variants, but the base models are the best." This suspicion grew stronger as Vase kept approaching different groups of people. Sometimes he got a chance to introduce his product before he was rejected, but most of the time they didn't bother hearing him out. Perhaps most of these people were genuinely unable or unauthorized to purchase a new mech, but for the rest it was simply a lack of confidence in his ability to deliver. Still, he got close a couple of times. Some retired mech pilots or veteran mercenaries expressed some interest in ordering his mech. Only a few things held them back. "Our mercenary corps mostly goes out on extended patrols. While the short-term battle performance of your variant is impressive, we can't take it if it fails to keep up on our week-long patrol routes. We're actually in need of plugging a gap in our mech lineup, and if you offered us the original Caesar Augustus the First, D be tempted. As it is, while your variant is affordable, even two of your mechs can't fulfill the role of a single well-armored mech. Your mech's offensive lineup is a little scattered. It inherits most of the disadvantages of the Caesar Augustus but comes without the base model's excellent armor. I'd rather buy a specialized mech that does one single job perfectly than a machine that purports to cover every area only to fail at most of them." He noticed that Carlos was off about his prediction that wealthy collectors were more likely to purchase his mechs. These collectors were highly discerning in their choice of mechs. They disdained cheap variants. Instead, they were more likely to chase after vintage base models or highly exclusive variants made with extraordinary materials. Wealthy mercenaries expressed the most interest in his product so far. They were open to purchasing a functional mech, but poked holes at the Mark Antony's weak points. The detriments outweighed the benefits even with the favorable pricing. Compared to the 65 million credit price tag of an official Augustus, the 24 million credits Vase humbly asked for his product was a steal. Still, not everyone was willing to accept that bargain bin price point. A flamboyant mercenary who behaved more like a pirate than a legitimate mercenary laughed in Vey's face when he quoted the price. 24 million. 24 FC King million. I'd have to work my ass off for more than 5 years to earn back such an amount. How about giving me a break? Let's say, 12 million. Vey's was immune to awkward situations by now. He could maintain his smile even when the universe was ending. For an advance payment of 12 million credits, I can produce and deliver the mech to you within half a month. You can pay the other half once the MTA certifies my mech. Seeing that Vey's wasn't willing to bargain, the rowdy mercenary turned away. No thanks. I'm too short on cash. Even as the final match ended in a rousing last act, Vey still hadn't achieved a single sale. He was beginning to grow a little nervous. This evening was the best and only opportunity he had to approach the rich and the strong. After this unofficial holiday ended, most of them would go back to their offices or mechs. By then, where could he find a buyer for his mech? Should he post an ad on the MTA internal market and cross his fingers some chump picked up his offer out of the hundreds of thousands of alternative ones? He began to despair a little. He was so desperate, he'd get on his knees and beg if it increased his chances. The more he interacted with the people around him, the more he realized the mech market was more insular than he thought. The vibrant market the MTA portrayed did not apply to the situation on the ground. The MTA market communities mostly encompassed entire star sectors. A single third-rate state such as the Bright Republic couldn't support too many producers. Vey's realized that by setting up his mech boutique in Cloudy Curtain, he'd inadvertently isolated himself from his clientele. A quiet environment, lack of competitors and favorable taxes meant nothing if Vey's was unable to earn any form of revenue in the coming weeks. He lacked too many things. Though he had a tenuous connection to the Larkinson family, they wouldn't go out on a limb to subsidize his business nor purchase his first mech. While they saved up a sizable amount of credits over the years, most of them were reserved for emergencies. Using them to save a failed business was not in the family's collective interests. Without the support of any substantial influence, Vey's was like a boat trapped in the middle of sea. Only a desolate expanse of water surrounded him in each direction. Where could he find an island to gain some respite? Hello there, Vey's. Whoa. Vey's almost jumped out of his skin from the abrupt greeting. He turned around to see the test pilot who piloted his mech during the qualifications. Hans. I didn't expect to see you here. I'm an active serviceman as well. Once I finished my duties, I thought I'd drop by and catch up to the finals. Sad to say I came too late. Anyway, what got you so down? Vey's explained his circumstances and then elaborated on his difficulties in pushing his new design. I'm not surprised no one's ever taken you on your offer. Besides the detriments you already mentioned, the most important reason why no one dares to accept an order is due to the untested nature of your design. Pilots like us, we don't trust the spec sheet produced by the MTA. It's been wrong plenty of times before and will continue to do so until they get their asses kicked out of their monopoly in mech management. As I was saying, we pilots like to look at the actual performance in the field instead of a bunch of abstract numbers that may have been fudged. The numbers are absolutely reliable. I've achieved a small amount of success selling virtual versions of my Mark Antony and Iron Spirit. So far, not a single customer returned to complain about any deviations from their mech's official performance. I advise you not to bring up these virtual games. Hans firmly advised. At our level, no one takes Iron Spirit seriously. The inaccuracy and deviance from actual piloting is as more pronounced at the higher ranks of the game. It takes a lot of effort to adjust to two different environments, so most older mech pilots don't bother maintaining an active presence in Iron Spirit. What about you, then? You did a great job piloting my Drake through the gauntlet. Are you interested in a purchase? The test pilot shook his head. I don't earn enough to afford a personal mech, and since I test out new designs as a job, I don't pilot a fixed mech when I'm at work. Vey's received another disappointment. If even a mech pilot as friendly as Hans refused to buy his mech, then his chances of convincing other pilots was practically nil. I might know someone who could be persuaded to take a leap at your design. Hans added as he saw the crushed response in the young man. I'll do you a favor and introduce him to you. Whether you manage to close a deal with him will depend on your own efforts. A chance is all I ask for. I'm grateful for any assistance you provide. Hans leisurely led Vey's through the crowd of spectators paying attention to the elaborate award ceremony. The Young Tigers exhibition was specifically organized by the Republic to glorify young heroes, so a lot of fanfare accompanied the awarding of prizes. Once they arrived at the door of a private room, Hans knocked at it with a peculiar rhythm. A beep sounded out as the lock disengaged. As they entered the box, they saw that almost nobody occupied the chairs and couches. Only the grandest seat supported a person. The man who sat on the chair looked like an old, gray-haired veteran that emanated the same vibe as his grandfather. Even from the entrance, Vase could feel the man was more than just an average veteran. "Ah, Captain Rodello, nice to see you again. I see you've brought a guest. Colonel, this is Vase Larkinson, the runner-up of the Fusion Cup. Vase, this is Colonel Aries Huntington." The retired colonel snorted at that. So the brat won a medal and a couple of perks. That's not a big deal compared to the young warriors on stage right now. He's not a pilot and I'm not here to bring him into your club. I just thought that since you have so much free time on your hands, you might be interested in what Vase is selling. Oh. The colonel took a closer look at Vase, actually taking him seriously this time. So what is it that demands my attention? It better be good. Knowing that he arrived at the best opportunity he could ever get this night, Vase adopted a professional tone and explained the capabilities of his mech. Huntington's expression remained carefully neutral as Vase elaborated on all the good and some of the not-so-good points of his mech. Perhaps revealing his own shortcomings wasn't the best idea, but he didn't want to risk getting blamed by the old man if he somehow caught on. Nevertheless, the colonel let him speak until he came at the end where he quoted his price. "And so for the total package, with just 24 million bright credits, it's yours. After paying an advance payment of half the price, I'll get to work on the mech as soon as I get back to my workshop. I'll have it ready for you within 2 weeks." Aries grumbled a bit to himself as he stroked his chin. Vase could tell he was wavering, but he couldn't determine what held the old man back from making the jump. Was it the armor? The lack of specialties? No, the old man finally replied after several minutes of consideration. "You make for a compelling case, but it's not what I need right now." Vase was devastated. He got so close to making a sale. Why did Aries turn away from his offer? The colonel insensitively waved them away. "Captain Rodello, this was a nice distraction, but don't bring anyone irrelevant to me again. The two of you can go bother someone else now. I won't see you out. Goodbye." Hans embarrassingly led Vase away from the private room. "Sorry about that. I thought he'd be more respectful. I've faced plenty of rejection before. It doesn't bother me to get turned away again." Although he said this, Vase sighed with disappointment. "I'm in an extremely difficult position if I can't find a customer for my mech." They both stayed silent for a moment before Hans thought up another idea. "Why not enlist the services of a broker?" "I've already thought of it," he replied. "But I need a large influx of cash within 2 weeks. If the broker takes his cut, I'm not sure I'm able to pay the bills that are due very soon." "Oh, relax. I know a woman who might cut a deal with you. Anything's negotiable. You should really think about it since brokers know their clients best." Hans had a point. Many small-scale mech designers often relied on specialized brokers and dealers to manage their sales and customer support. These crafty salespeople spend a lot of effort building up a network of customers and other contacts. They trained their bargaining and negotiation skills to a terrifying level. To be fair, despite the substantial cut they took with each successful sale, they were an indispensable part of the mech industry. That was why Vase allowed Hans to lead him all the way to the center, where a large crowd of well-dressed men exchanged their opinions about their favorite pilots of today's event. "Marcella Bollinger. Over here." "Oh hey Hans." A pudgy, dark-haired woman greeted the test pilot with a hug. "How's work?" Same old, same old. I'm not here to talk about my work. I'd like you to introduce you to an interesting fellow I met today." The woman raised her eyebrow and took an appraising look at Vase. "You're the Larkinson mech designer, aren't you? My, you're quite the big young man now. How's fame treating you?" "Not well since it isn't of much use in my current situation." Vase shook his head. He found the woman to be more approachable than he thought. "Hans told me that you're a mech broker. It happens that I have a new mech variant that I'd like to sell." "Ah, so it's business this time." Marcella's smile turned a little predatory. "On account of Hans, I'll hear you out. Let's bring you somewhere quiet first." As they entered an empty private room, Marcella took a seat at a couch and patted her side. "Take a seat, young man. Don't worry, I don't bite." Sitting so close to Marcella discomforted Vase. Marcella's stocky frame underneath her prim and formal business suit hinted at a military or mercenary background. Though he couldn't detect the killer vibes from her amiable smile, he was certain that this woman had been through a lot. With his extensive knowledge and experience in mechanics, he sniffed out the presence of prosthetics in her right arm. Let's start from the beginning. What kind of business are you taking part in and why do you need my services? Vase gave her the same story he told Colonel Aries. Since he couldn't hide things from a broker for long, he also mentioned his debt and interest payment situation. While giving out such sensitive information gave her a lot more negotiating power in any agreement they reached, it would prevent misunderstandings from happening in the beginning. Vase was willing to give up a few percentages of profit if it meant building up a solid relationship based on trust. Any broker recommended by Han shouldn't be too shady, he hoped. Okay, I see. Marcella tapped her manicured finger to her chin. Lay down the cost structure for me. A mech armored with HRF plating shouldn't carry an extravagant price. If I want to build the Mark Antony from the ground up, I need to use up 18 million credits worth of resources. The raw material cost of the HRF amounts to about 11 million, but I already received a stockpile of resources that's more than ample enough to armor a single unit. I can scrounge up the rest for about 7 million from the open market. That doesn't sound too bad, but you've left out your taxes, licensing costs, depreciation of your machines, and etc. Your real cost should be at least 50% higher. Vase nodded to show his agreement at her remark. Those costs aren't relevant to me in the short term. I don't pay any further costs for my production licenses, and the taxes and other stuff can be taken care of at the end of the year. Right now I'm desperate for a quick infusion of cash so I can meet my impending interest payment on my massive debt. That's business for you. At least 90% of all mech designers who start their own businesses don't get to make it this far. Production licenses are ridiculously expensive to obtain if you don't have any backing. It's kind of impressive that you received 2 of them as grants. That puts you in the same starting point as designers with a fully original design in their hands. That alone makes it worthwhile for me to invest in you. Vase looked hopeful at the positive remark. So you're willing to work with me? Yup. But don't get too cocky. I'm only in charge of the sales. I sell dozens of mechs each month so I have no time to hold your hands. That's all I really need. I can take care of myself, don't worry. First, let's talk about accounting. You need to get that in order as soon as you have the time. I saw you got awarded privilege status. Make use of that today and contact your planet's tax office to get preferable rates applied to your business activities ASAP. Most tax offices tend to waver a bit and put up a couple of roadblocks if you aren't an actual veteran. Best get that out of the way first before you're handed a much larger than expected tax at the end of the year. Vase nodded in understanding. Cloudy curtains in the middle of nowhere, so their taxes are already favorable to businesses. If I apply for preferable rates, my tax burden will probably not improve that much compared to doing business here in Bentheim. For a startup like you, every credit counts. You don't want to have a dispute with the planetary government this early in your career. If they want to, they can make your life hell. While Vase was skeptical that such a thing would happen in Cloudy Curtain, he nevertheless took the advice seriously. Second, while it might be too early to talk about this, but you really should find a better supplier for your raw material needs. The MTA internal market is only a bulletin board for resource providers to dump their excess and for mech designers to fill up a gap in their regular shipments of resources. The ready availability of most resources in the market is only made possible by overcharging them by as much as 20%. It's not easy for a startup to get suppliers to take you seriously. That's why I said it's something to consider later on. The open market should be fine for now, but keep in mind that you're needlessly throwing away about 2 million credits for each Mark Antony you produce. That debt problem could be history if you solve your wasteful sourcing. Marcella moved on as such a thorny problem couldn't be solved at this moment. As for your variant selling potential, I already have a handful of clients in mind. I'll warn you that without a track record, your new variant won't be able to demand much of a premium. Still, I can work some magic here. It helps that you designed your mech with some flair in mind. It looks almost as impressive as the genuine Caesar Augustus. What kind of price are you going to set? Marcella smirked at the question. It's not polite to pry too much into a broker's secret. Suffice to say, you'll earn your dues even after my commission is taken into account. I'm not going to like what I'm about to hear, am I right? She tapped her fingers on her comm and summoned a standard contract detailing a business relationship between a broker and an independent mech manufacturer. While I like you and you've got Hans to back you up, that's no reason for me to do charity. I run a business, you know. I have to little pipsqueaks back at home who I need to clothe and feed. Vase turned on his comm and accepted the transfer. He opened the document and read over the details. His eyes practically popped out when he came across the sales commission Marcella demanded. 20% of gross profit. That's a generous amount already if you consider how much work I have to put in to sell a niche last-gen mech with limited application. Is there any way you can give me a break? It's a little much. While I'm open to negotiation, I'm not budging on the remuneration. I'm also taking into account your sales volume. A small-scale mech boutique like yours won't be able to produce a lot of mechs annually. The scale of your business is really minuscule compared to my biggest clients. A one-man show can only take you so far, and that means I'm perfectly justified to demand a bigger piece of your pie. The huge amount of money Marcella skimmed off the top potentially dwarfed his debt burden. If Marcella sold his variant at the bottom price of 24 million credits, then he'd earn 7 million credits in gross profit, which was the difference between the sales price and the cost of goods to manufacture the mech. 20% of 7 million credits amounted to 1.4 million credits. If Marcella sold 3 more mechs, then she'd earn more than the bank. Hans, who stood quietly against the wall, gave out his opinion. 20% is harsh, but you can expect Marcella to treat you fairly. Unlike other brokers who represent as much as over 100 different mech manufacturers, she makes sure to represent your mechs with actual effort. Nodding, Marcella explained her stance. You're looking at the costs while neglecting the benefits. Sure, you can approach a public broker who will offer 10 or even 5% of gross profits, but what incentive do they have to raise their sales volume? If you sign a contract with me for 20%, you can be damn sure that I'll work my ass off to sell as much of your mechs as I can. Right now, you need to have a visible market presence and develop a reputation for your business more than you need to maximize profits. Vase had to admit that Marcella sounded reasonable. Of course, maybe Hans and Marcella were conspiring together against him and took advantage of his desperation. Also, the commission you leave me is nothing compared to what you will get in return. I might not be the biggest name around town, but I have a lot of friends in high places. You'll be paying me for my extensive network that I've invested many millions in building up. A lot of other brokers might sell 100 mechs a month, but 99% of those mechs are bottom of the barrel. You can forget about earning the big bucks if you take your business to the budget brokers. The contract also states that you'll be my exclusive broker for 10 years. I don't recall this being a standard clause. Our business relationship is a two-way street. Marcella pointed out, gesturing her hand to Vase and then to her. If you are prepared to invest in me, I'll do the same to you. The contract applies for 10 years because I don't want to do the hard work helping you build up a name in the market, only for you to bail out on me a couple of years from now and take your business elsewhere. As I said before, this isn't a bad thing. A 10-year exclusivity clause means that your interests align with mine. Think of how big your name will be 10 years from now, and think of who can make this all possible. In other words, helping Marcella was equivalent to helping himself down the road. Vase understood the rationale, even if it left a bad taste in his mouth. What if Marcella neglected his products one day? He had very little recourse to force her to work her ass off if she focused on a shinier product from a competitor. Marcella's eyes sharpened as she noticed his wavering expression. I'll sweeten the pot for you. If you sign the contract this night, I'll guarantee you that I'll find a customer no later than 24 standard hours from now. I'll even hand you an advance of 7 million credits so you can purchase and take back the raw materials you still need to start building your mech. What if you can't find a customer within that time? Then it will take 2 days. Marcella shrugged nonchalantly. Trust a lady to know what she's doing. And what if it takes more time? Even if I fabricate the Mark Antony and let the MTA certify it within 2 weeks, if I don't have a buyer to take my product away, I'll be in big trouble with the bank. Could you help me out if they come knocking at my door? Sorry Vase, but I already told you that you should take care of your own issues by yourself. I'm only responsible for sales. The advance payment is just a one-time bonus. And frankly, I don't mind seeing you sweat a bit. How else can I be assured you'll have a mech ready for me to sell within 2 weeks? Vase suspected Marcella was fond of using monetary incentives to establish her business relationships. This is just the start of our partnership. If you don't trust me to keep my promises and do my job, then it's better if you look elsewhere. You have a point. Vase admitted with a resigned sigh. They spent an hour hammering out a basic contract. Vase even used some of his prize money to hire a legal expert on very short notice in order to make sure he wasn't being bamboozled. Sure, Marcella already screwed him up front. He only wanted to make sure she didn't screw him from behind at the same time. After Phase, Marcella and their legal representatives all agreed the contract looked okay. They signed it and sent it off to be notarized. Marcella received the full blueprint of the Mark Antony along with detailed specifications, or at least as much as the simulations could determine. She even demanded the right to manage his Iron Spirit designer account. Why would you need something like that? It helps if certain clients get to test drive your mech in the game. Don't misunderstand, they're not stupid or addicted to the game. While it's not an accurate representation, if they feel good about piloting a virtual mech that's about 90% similar to the real thing, they won't care about the 10% Iron Spirit unable to simulate. I guess you can also create some good promotional material for my mech. A visual example is very effective in generating initial interest in your product. We humans are primarily visual creatures after all. Watching a reasonable facsimile in action is a lot more visceral than extrapolating the performance of your mech from a dry spec sheet. After they exchanged a few more words, they finally called it a night. Marcella Bollinger left the exhibition center with a new cash cow under her belt, while Vase still felt mixed about the contract he signed. He hardly bargained any additional benefits out of the bulldozer in action. He pretty much got run over during the entire conversation. He even felt it wasn't a bad thing getting taken advantage of. He reasoned that if Marcella wanted milked him dry, she'd have to put in an effort to squeeze a lot of value out of his work. Why am I imagining myself as a milk cow? When Phase returned to his hotel room, he faced two things. First, a cranky gem cat angrily yelled at him for neglecting his pet all day. Second, he received a notification from his bank account that Marcella sent him the $7 million advance for his material needs. Sleep can wait, Vase said to himself as he activated a terminal and visited the Mech Trade Association's online market. He already took note of all the materials he required, so after a meticulous check he put all the items in his shopping list and confirmed his purchase. The 7 million bright credits vanished from his account like it never existed. At least I paid for express shipping. The goods should arrive by my doorstep by the time I exit from the shuttle. As he laid down on his bed, he reflected on the tumultuous events he experienced in his trip to Bentheim. In just 2 days, he put his name on the map by winning second place in a side tournament of the Young Tigers exhibition. While not as prestigious as the main event, it was nonetheless one of the best prizes a young mech designer could win in the Republic. Not only that, he enlisted the services of a well-established mech broker. With Marcella Bollinger taking care of selling his products here in Bentheim, Vase could devote his full attention to fabricating his mechs and coming up with new designs. Still, the rip-off 20% commission she took out of his gross profit hurt his bottom line. Still, if she could ensure a steady volume of customers, the amount of profit he made over time could be a lot higher than if he wasted time selling the mechs in person. Maybe Marcella has a point. If I hire my own people, I can do my own thing and let my employees take care of all the annoying stuff. Naturally, that was something to consider once his business got up and going. For now, his mech boutique was so small-scale that any employee he hired now would just be sitting on his thumbs. After taking a long and deep sleep, Vase woke up a little late. It barely left him time to shower and pack up his luggage. He was barely able to grab a quick sandwich before Captain Jillian hustled him together with the other contestants to the spaceport. This time, the crowd of mech pilots regarded him with a different attitude. Some looked impressed by his accomplishments. Others were puzzled why a talent like him settled down in the hinterlands of the Republic. In any case, Vase knew he'd be stared at like this for quite a while. Of all the graduates who participated in the YTE, only he achieved the best results. The next best pilot only barely managed to scrape into the top 50. Vase wanted to focus on his upcoming fabrication project, so he fobbed off most attempts by the mech pilots to spark up a friendship. It wasn't that he appreciated new friends, but he simply didn't have the time. Just after the shuttle flew up and escaped Benthium's gravity, he was already pulling up his comm and making a detailed flowchart of his fabrication process. His slapdash way of fabrication might work with Iron Spirit's modern 3D printer and assembler, but his equipment in the real universe faced a lot more constraints. It might take only one wrong setting to ruin a component worth 1 million credits. So it paid to be prudent. He also applied for a production license of the Festive Cloud generator while he was at it. As one of the two only non-native components of the Mark Antony, Vase couldn't produce it with the MTA approval if he hadn't applied. Fortunately, as the component was more of a joke than anything else, Vase only had to part with 100,000 credits to get a 10-year production license for the decorative part. His cash reserves instantly halved. The space shuttle leisurely fell behind a spacious queue towards their designated Lagrange point. The heavy traffic to and from Bentheim caused these Lagrange points to be congested, though that was only a relative term considering the vastness of space. Still, only a limited amount of ships were able to depart at the same time without disturbing the local spacetime too much, so each ship had to queue up and wait in line. When their turn finally came, everyone paused what they were doing and prepared for the FTL transition. The shuttle vibrated a little before the green light was given. No problems occurred when the passenger shuttle engaged its FTL drive. The return trip took longer to arrive back at Cloudy Curtain. Benthium's favorable gravity currents allowed all ships traveling towards the port system to cut back on their traveling time. It provided no advantages when ships departed the system and traveled to a non-port system. Thus, it took about 1.5 very precious days off his timetable when the shuttle finally arrived at the edge of Cloudy Curtain star system. The slow, in-system burn from the edge of the system to its interior took up some time as well. Everyone else just relaxed and ate their provided meals, visited the toilets or leaned back their seats in order to take a nap. Only Faze was fidgeting while working on his planning. He went over the same scheme over and over until he forced himself to take a nap. When the shuttle finally reached the surface, Faze thanked the heavens and disentangled himself from the others as fast as he could. With only a hasty goodbye to Captain Jillian, Faze ordered a priority taxi and zipped back to the outskirts where his workshop beckoned him home. Home sweet home, Faze said with relief. Lucky echoed his thoughts as he scurried all the way back to his favorite perch on his couch. Let's see if they delivered the goods already. Faze spent a substantial amount of credits fast-tracking his material goods shipments from Bentheim directly to Cloudy Curtain. When he exited into his backyard and entered the cordoned-off area meant for aerial deliveries, he encountered 5 stacks of freshly containers. As he personally opened each container and confirmed its contents, he smiled for the first time in days. I've got everything I need now to begin fabrication. Marcella even sent him a brief message when he was still on the shuttle. She believed she found a customer for his variant, but the negotiations dragged on. The customer wanted to squeeze as much benefits he could out of his order, so Marcella wanted to slow things down in order to make it appear they weren't willing to go too low. Glad that the marketing was taken care of, Faze was just about to start fabricating when he forgot about one very important detail. I haven't started up the mech designer system in almost a week. I wonder what it thinks about what I've experienced. At least it should give me a reward for taking second place in the Fusion Cup, right? Though not entirely sure, Faze booted up the program, resting peacefully in his calm. With trepidation, he waited as the loading screen filled up and a familiar menu popped up. The system was back in action. Hey system. Did you miss me? Welcome user. You have 2 impending messages waiting for your perusal. Do you wish to display them? Yes. Gimme my rewards. Faze already rubbed his hands thinking of all the goodies the system might reward him for his great performance. You have assembled an original mech design out of a selection of pre-prepared components. Design evaluation, Drake. Model name, Drake. Original manufacturer, Faze Larkinson. Weight classification, medium. Recommended role, jump trooper. Armor, B-. Carrying capacity, C. Aesthetics, C+. Endurance, C. Energy efficiency, E+. Flexibility, D. Firepower, B-. Integrity, F+. Mobility, B+. Spotting, C. X factor, E-. Cost efficiency, A. Project involvement, 75%. Original component composition, 0%. Overall evaluation, a shoddy mech compared to genuine models, it nevertheless fulfilled its purpose. Put together out of standard pre-assembled components, the Drake is a remarkably cost-efficient if it is produced in a large scale. However, its lacking integrity and energy efficiency prevents this model from outperforming any other budget model. You have received 1,000 design points for completing an original design that has no other equivalent. You have received 100 design points for designing a mech with a trace of X factor. 1,000 points. Besides the welcome package, it was the most generous reward the system had ever given him for a single objective. It also indicated that the system appreciated original designs more than variants. There isn't anything else. Your design does not fulfill the requirements to earn additional rewards. Please work more diligently in improving the core foundations of your next original design. In other words, the system disdained his cheap and trashy design. You know, I only had less than 1 day to whip up this mech, right? I did a decent job considering I was working with severely outdated parts. The system acted as if his words were passing clouds and continued on with the updates. You have received an event mission. Please check the missions page for the details. Event mission. Mission, Fusion Cup. Difficulty, A, rank. Prerequisites, qualify for the Fusion Cup. Description. The Fusion Cup is your first public stage where you can exhibit your talents as a mech designer. Do not cower from the challenges you face, but instead embrace them. A mech designer must be bold under pressure and fearless when performing in public. Crush your rivals and achieve a supreme result by winning first place. Reward, variable depending on your final rank. Congratulations for partially completing the event mission. A competent mech designer must maintain absolute confidence while simultaneously possess the capacity to self-reflect. Never waver in the face of defeat. Face the universe with your back held straight. Vase chuckled as he realized the system gave this mission while he had just passed the qualifiers. Then he stopped his laugh when he realized the system kept tabs on him while he hadn't even executed the program in days. How was it able to observe his every movement in such an electronically well-guarded environment? The system quickly gave him the rewards for the mission he never knew he received before he completed it. Vase treated it like dessert after a sumptuous dinner. For winning second place, you have received 500 design points. That's it. Please endeavor to work harder and never let yourself be overshadowed. Vase almost broke out with curses. The system sure asked a lot out of him. He only used the system for 2.5 months. How much could he improve in so little time? Even with the help of the system, Vase estimated he needed at least 2 or 3 years of active use of the system in order to catch up to the likes of Edwin McKinney. If he took into account that Edwin constantly improved as well, it might take 5 or 7 years. To become a star mech designer, Vase had a long way to go. He not only had to shore up his fundamentals, he also had to build up his business and design market-viable mechs that not only took into account the performance of the mech, but also its cost efficiency. Designing and fabricating the Mark Antony was just the first step. The system already hinted at him that producing an original design was the road to real prosperity. Well, to design an original blueprint from the ground up requires a boatload of skills. And to improve my skills, I need DP, lots of DP. Eager to see how much DP he currently possessed, Vase called up his status. Status. Name, Vase Larkinson. Profession, novice mech designer. Specializations, none. Design points, 1,632. Attributes. Strength, 0.7. Dexterity, 0.7. Endurance, 0.7. Intelligence, 1.2. Creativity, 1. Concentration, 1.2. Neural aptitude, F. Skills. Assembly, apprentice minus 3D printer proficiency 1, assembler proficiency 1. Business, apprentice. Computer science, incompetent. Electrical engineering, novice. Mathematics, incompetent. Mechanics, apprentice minus jury rigging 2, speed tuning 1. Metallurgy, apprentice. Metaphysics, incompetent. Physics, novice minus lightweight armor optimization 1, medium weight armor optimization 1. Evaluation, on the cusp of breaking out of pure stupidity. The windfall of 1,632 DP came as a timely surprise to Vase. With such a large amount of DP, he could complete his purchase of several sub-skill upgrades that he had his eyes on that would help with his first fabrication project in the real universe. What also surprised him was that his endurance increased by 0.1 points. Well, it makes sense. I've been working my ass off for several long hours. I've learned to push my limits during the competition. With a sack of DP in his metaphorical hands, Vase eagerly switched to the system skill tree. A familiar holographic display lit up all around him, showing him thousands of all the possible skills and sub-skill he could acquire. He regarded the skill tree as his most important weapon towards overtaking the likes of Edwin McKinney and Patricia Schneider. No matter how fast they improved, they eventually had to put in the hard work to learn new theories and become proficient in new techniques. All Vase had to do was earn a bunch of DP from designing and selling new mechs and invest them into the skill tree. Aside from the ever-elusive X Factor, Vase had access to an unprecedented variety of new and exotic skills. Some of the more notable entries even threw his entire conception of mechs upside down. Biomechanical fusion, quad pilot connected neural interfacing, permanent consciousness imprisonment. What are those crazy scientists up to? The more he glanced at the names, the more he felt as if the space outside the Bright Republic was a scary place. His sanity might have worsened if the system hadn't blurred the more specialized skills down the skill trees. For now, Vase had no interest in taking up these exotic skills. Not only wouldn't he be able to explain how he became proficient in these exotic and restricted technologies, he also plainly lacked the luxury to waste his points in needless side projects. If he wanted to close the gap to his rivals, then he had to invest in his foundation skills, no matter how boring they sounded. Since I'm getting ready to fabricate the Mark Antony, I should shore up my assembler sub-skills. He purchased both Assembler Proficiency 2 and 3D Printer Proficiency 2 for 400 DP each. After filling his DP reserve, Vase received an influx of new information and knowledge from the depths of his brain. He realized he already knew most of the information coming to the front, he just hadn't realized how important they were and how it connected directly to his performance when utilizing the machines. He learned so many new tricks to improve the quality of his fabrication and how to reduce the occurrence and severity of faults. The flood of surfaced knowledge fully unfolded within his mind in a way that made it very difficult for him to forget it again. He advanced his proficiencies with the 3D printer and the assembler by at least a year of dedicated practice. This was valuable experience that already came into use as Vase called up his detailed planning of the fabrication process and made some adjustments to his steps. After spending half an hour correcting a lot of tiny details, his confidence of successfully fabricating the Mark Antony without any major defects increased from 50% to 70%. Too bad it's not the 100% certainty that I wish for. My gear is just too bad. His increased proficiency couldn't overcome the limitations of his cheap, second-hand equipment. Though they cost several hundred million credits in total, Vase regretfully lamented his father hadn't worked a little bit harder in procuring better quality equipment before he disappeared. Upgrading my gear is a priority for later, much like everything else on my plate. Remembering that Marcella hadn't gotten back to him about a customer, he called up her number. Hey Vase. I know what you're calling for. The deal has just been completed. Marcella smirked as she said her next words. Guess how much credits he threw at me to order your mech? Did you manage to sell it at 24 million? Ha. That's chump change. It's much higher. 25. 26. Nope. Marcella gestured with her hands to bring up an invoice in the projector. Look for yourself what magic I achieved. His eyes practically bulged out as he saw that Marcella's customer ordered his mech for a whopping 28 million credits. The huge price figure amounted to a gross profit of 11 million credits if he delivered his mech in time and in good condition. It certainly raised his faith of Marcella's ability. Perhaps partnering with her was the best decision Vase ever made. Marcella tapped her fingers onto her desk, snapping him out of his dreams. Don't get too excited, buddy. Running a mech business isn't a casual undertaking. You have to properly plan for your expenses. If you factor in your interest payments, your tax burden, your capital assets depreciation, then you'll find that your net profits is a lot smaller than you thought. The excitement in his eyes died down. She was right, of course. Well, my taxes will at least be lightened. The planetary government is already processing my preferable treatment status. I should be able to get my tax rate reduced to 15%. Such a low tax rate was very favorable to Vase already. If he set up his business in Bentheim, then he'd have to fork out 35% even with preferable treatment. Your expenses and other burdens are lower than most other mech designers, but don't forget your business is a one-man show. Your scale can't compare to most small to medium enterprises that have based themselves in Bentheim for years. The industry revolves around a minimum amount of scale production. If you want to improve your mechs, you need better machines, and that means you have to start saving money now. Vase nodded, understanding the importance of what she said. His 3D printer and assembler were good for a decade, maybe two if he stretched it and installed some upgrades, but eventually he wanted to move up to using more capable machines worth billions of credits. I've got so many things to spend my money on. Vase lamented to himself. Earning a couple of billion credits was a pipe dream for most people. Even seasoned mech designers often despaired at the costs their businesses demanded. In any case, just do your work. I'll be expecting a satisfactory result within 10 days if you want to ship your mech to the client in time. Will you be able to make it in that time? He nodded with confidence. His planning stretched out the fabrication process to 9 days already, which was a lengthy time for an average mech. Considering it was his first time doing it for real, he wanted to slow down and produce each part with meticulous care. I'll have the mech delivered to the local branch of the MTA within 9 days for inspection if there's no problems. I don't expect any delays, but I doubt I'll get slowed down more than a day at most. Good, because a lot is riding on this deal. This is your chance to break into the market, Vase, so nothing can go wrong. After a bit of lecturing by Marcella, she finally hung up, leaving Vase free to begin his work. He pulled up his sleeves and checked his plans for the last time. Nothing appeared out of place. He had the materials, the equipment and the time he needed to fashion his first mech into existence. Before he started, he took a deep breath and adjusted his mental state. He didn't want to deliver an average product and call it a day. He wanted to wow the client. And the way to do that is by incorporating something unique only to him into the mech. Even if most of the pilots of his mechs couldn't articulate the X factor, it would still help improve their impressions on his work. He approached the 3D printer with reverence. He loaded up the files of the valiant-looking Mark Antony. From its vapor-generated crest to its adorned and sturdy tower shield, the mech already radiated a sense of valor in its appearance. Its entire purpose of existence was to act as a vanguard, a breaker of blockades and a workhorse that could take a beating for the team. Vase took inspiration of the mock-up and immersed himself into bringing this design to life. I am not building a mech. I am birthing it to life. Saying it mattered to Vase. It sounded nonsensical or meaningless, but to someone who took a peek through the door that hid the incredible might of the X Factor, it was an important distinction that made all the difference in the end product. He was an artisan of mechs, not an industrialist who desired to pump out as many mechs as he wanted. To treat the mech as a living thing instead of a lifeless machine was the first step to realizing the X Factor. All right, I've got you fixed on my mind. He tapped the projection to separate the hologram into thousands of individual components. He started with the easiest, but also the most important part, the internal frame. The internal frame was mechanically simple to produce, but required high consistency in order to make it last for many years. Any hidden faults buried deep within its solid surface could lead to devastating consequences in the battlefield. The MTA posed strict requirements to the integrity of the internal frame, so Vase could absolutely not afford to slack off when fabricating these seemingly simple piece of alloys. The 3D printer performed up to standard. Vase had already checked and calibrated all of the important machines in his workshop long ago, but it was pleasant to see the machine slowly churn out frame after frame. Vase took particular care when producing the sockets and joints that allowed the frame to move its limbs as natural as a human being. Only a couple of minor deviances emerged in their production, which was a sign the printer's precision was off, a particularly fatal flaw when producing tiny components like processors. It was a good thing Vase left the entire day for further calibrations. With his enhanced knowledge of the 3D printer's workings, he dug into the advanced programming of the machine and ran a lot of tests and simulations. He narrowed down the source of the problem to a worn-down injector. Vase solved the problem by fabricating a replacement before opening up the machine to replace the component in question. There. Now it should work as advertised. The rest of the internal frame components got produced without a hitch. Since night had already fallen, Vase took a break and took care of his personal needs. The next day, he devoted his attention to crafting the HRF armor plating. It took 3 days to process the raw materials into a suitable form if Vase aimed for consistency and precision. While most of the work was tedious and repetitive, he was constantly on guard for any deviations from the norm. A percentage less of a certain metal added to a process might ruin the entire batch. He refined tons of materials together into different materials, which got processed even further for up to 5 times. Each step transformed the main alloys from a worthless piece of junk to a less worthless piece of junk. By the time several days had gone past, the mixed materials had already transformed into smooth pieces of shaped plating. Vase knocked his knuckles against the surface of a thick chest plate. It rang with the delightful tone of a uniform piece of metal. He spent a lot of time fashioning these plates, each into the appropriate form to clad the Mark Antony's outer layer. They still looked grayish-brown, the native color of HRF plating. He'd add some color later. The next 2 days he produced the other parts of the mech. The most important of which were the power reactor and the engines. His 3D printer had some trouble producing the most unique sections of those components, but Vase was able to stave off any disasters due to his improved skills and his abundant experience in producing them already inside Iron Spirit. He only really paid attention to the challenging components and produced the easier ones with a little bit more leisure, though he always made sure to double-check their integrity. Phew. They all came out okay. He only replaced a few sections with newly fabricated copies when his checks revealed a couple of hidden faults. Such suboptimal components wouldn't wreck a mech immediately, but it left the machine vulnerable to a cascade of malfunctions later on. Dealing with it now prevented the MTA from using it as a reason to disqualify his mech during their inspection. Now that he finished producing all of the parts, he moved on to the assembler. It was the tallest machine by far, reaching as high as any small office building downtown. While the assembler was a single set, the system was actually composed of many different lifters and hefty arms. They allowed a single person or an AI routine to put together a mech without relying on any other manpower. Modern assemblers formed the basis of today's boutique industries, allowing individual craftsmen to compete against giant mass producers economically. Though mass production always remained as the most cost and resource-efficient mode of production, small-scale manufacturers could tailor their individual products much better to their customers. Naturally, the huge transgalactic corporations hadn't sat still and incorporated assemblers in their own factories in order to offer the same customization capability, but it never really came close. In any case, Vase owned a run-of-the-mill cheap assembler that wasn't in its prime condition anymore. Like his 3D printer, the assembler showed some signs of use and past repairs. Luckily, the assembler he possessed was not too advanced, so Vase wasn't worried those self-made repairs would screw up the system. His checks also made sure the assembler remained in working condition. Damn, 6 days have gone by already. I only have 2 days to put my mech together. He could produce the entire Mark Antony inside Iron Spirit with that much time. Hopefully, once he got more familiar with his equipment, he'd speed up his production process to match his capabilities in the game. For now, slow and steady was the way to go. From a haphazard pile of components, the mech slowly came to life. Vase started putting together its internal frame, which formed its skeleton. This was the simplest part of the assembly process, as the internal frame components were built as puzzle pieces that snapped into place with each other with natural ease. Once the skeleton was fixed into place, Vase started to add the essential organs to the frame. The engines, power reactor, energy cells, sensors, and most importantly the cockpit were put into place one by one. They fit into their assigned places like obedient soldiers falling into parade. The trickiest segment of the assembly process came when Vase installed the cabling. Though not as difficult as doing it for the Caesar Augustus, he sometimes had to resort to pushing or hammering certain sections in place. This is not supposed to happen at all. I guess it was wishful thinking for my 3D printer to produce all of the parts within tolerance. It might not be a big deal if part A came out of the printer half a millimeter thicker or so. But when parts C, F, J, Y and more all exhibited variations in their dimensions, then they could cause a chain reaction of misalignment when he assembled them all together into one machine. Fortunately for Vase, the deviations were within an acceptable range. Besides some squirming, he managed to fit the components decently together. Maybe it's not a bad thing this mech is not a carbon copy of its blueprint. The variations makes it unique. Just like each and every human is different from each other. Heartless fabricators detested deviations like this, but in the perspective of life, Vase thought it was not a completely bad thing to keep some eccentricities. Naturally, it was one thing to be a little strange, but if you were born full of defects, then Vase would never be able to sell the mech. After making sure the components still worked at peak efficiency, Vase moved on to the final touches. He placed the many pieces of armor in their designated positions. Countless robotic arms picked up pieces of plating and carefully aligned them before placing them together. Special screws and adhesives kept them in place. He also put together the mech's default armament, the mace and heavy tower shield. Assembling the latter was a tiresome ordeal due to the sheer amount of plates stacked into one single hole. All the components came into place near the end of his 2-day marathon. Vase sighed in relief as he hit the button to let the painter module of the assembler go to work. He was way too tired to coat and paint the mech's outer layer by himself. Screwing up the coating mattered very little to him anyway. Once a few hours passed by, the advanced coating dried out rapidly, leaving the dark, intimidating form of a mech Vase had spent many hours imagining its appearance. Having spent more than 8 days pouring his heart, focus and even love into its production, Vase felt an unprecedented surge of pride and satisfaction well up deep inside of him. His dreams had come true. He fabricated a mech of his own design with his own 2 hands. His eyes welled up in tears as he admired the tall and armored mech's domineering contours. He refused to believe no one would remain unaffected when they came close to this mech for the first time. Since you're my firstborn son, you deserve a name that fits with your pedigree. I will call you Phoenix Cry. Naming the mech was a spur-of-the-moment decision from the upswell of emotions. He broke a taboo by giving it a personal name as a mech designer. Usually, the pilots named their mechs after a period of getting accustomed to each other. He hoped the client wouldn't mind too much and keep the name. Though the mech was technically complete and fully functional in its operations, Vase wished to gift the mech one additional part. This extra addition was already in the blueprint, but he used a fake to substitute for the real deal. He used the assembler's mobile lift to reach to the mech's chest and opened up its cockpit. Lucky, who had been watching Vase closely during his work these days, also followed him up. Plain curiosity sparkled within his lively eyes. The fresh and sterile interior of the cockpit unfolded in his sights. With a hop, he entered the cramped area and sat down on its specially designed synthetic cushion seat. For a moment, Vase imagined piloting the Phoenix Cry himself. With his head connected to the neural interface, he visualized screens coming to life around him as he piloted the mech through a fierce battle. He snapped out of it after a minute. "I'm not a potentate. I'm never fated to battle in the front lines." The sorrow in his heart threatened to overcome his jubilation, but he managed to keep his negative emotions in check. His lack of piloting aptitude was an old regret. Instead, he put a hand in his pocket and retrieved a dark red carnelian. The gemstone's subtle gradient alluded to a lifelike drop of blood. It inspired a sense of vitality and passion. He could think of no better gem to crown his first creation. Lucky meowed at the sight of its old excretion, pawing at it with the playfulness of a child stirring around his plate of food. "Do you recognize it? You crapped this out while you stayed in the hotel. If the cleaning staff hadn't alerted me to its presence, I might have missed this out." Vase accumulated a nice stockpile of gems, but most of them provided marginal benefits at a very obscure magnitude. The gem Lucky excreted in Bentheim clearly outshined his previous droppings for reasons he wasn't sure. He hadn't fed Lucky with any notable minerals except what the hotel provided as an additional service. Perhaps the crowded, tech-filled environment excited the gem cat. In any case, the gem's attributes stood out in more than one way, and the color also matched the mech. With a couple of hand-sized tools, Vase extracted the generic red stone in the middle of the dashboard that represented the mech's power button and placed the carnelian in its place, making sure to affix it securely in its fitting. After he finished, Vase leaned back in the chair and admired how the lustrous gem attracted the eye. He inspected it yet again. Carnelian of focus. Increases the pilot's concentration by 0.1 when installed on a mech. The attribute was very special. Unlike the other gemstones Lucky dropped, this one improved the attributes of the pilot rather than the mech. How that worked, Vase had no idea, but he knew the value of such a boost. Though not a game-changer by any standard, it served to improve the pilot's impression of the Phoenix Cry while also giving him a minor edge which could prove useful in a tough battle. Furthermore, the gemstone's pilot-focused attribute also allowed Vase to hide its benefits from the MTA. Vase had no good way to explain how a mech was able to move 0.5% faster or could withstand lasers 1% better than the HRF plating was designed to take on. Before Vase could acquire better skills that could camouflage such benefits, Vase found it prudent to stick to subtle gemstones and keep the ones with material benefits for later use. Enough dreaming. It's time to ready this mech for sale. First up, I'll have to certify the Phoenix Cry. Like and subscribe.